Hey everyone, welcome to the Vintage Super League. Luis Vargas here with Eric Froelich. We've got not an elimination match exactly, but a match where there's definitely something on the line. We've got Paul Rietzl facing off against David Ochoa, though in this particular case, Reed is once again stepping in to try to increase his playoff chances, given that Reed's record would definitely be good enough this season.
Yeah, I think we decided that if there is that big tie at 5-4 between yourself and me, we'll just both be eliminated and Reed will take our spot.
No, I'm in for that.
Yeah, he's put up a pretty impressive record. All of the replacements really had. It's been a tough season, but Reed is obviously one of the best in the world, coming off a Pro Tour top eight, same as yourself, and yeah, see if his heater continues.
To be clear, I defeated Reed in that top eight.
Yeah, I mean, Luck defeated Reed in that top eight, and you were piloting Luck.
I cannot argue with that. I had two collected companies in a row where I needed to hit Reflector Mage plus a creature with a mage already in my hand, and I just cast them back to back.
Pretty
So
reasonable, all things considered. It's probably on the low end of some of the luck that has experienced in the last 9 months. I mean, obviously it takes an incredible amount of skill to top eight three Pro Tours in a row, but there's probably a little bit of luck involved as well.
yeah, it takes a lot of luck. Let's just put it that way. So we've got a matchup here. We've got Reed piloting David Ochoa's Workshop aggro deck, playing against Paul playing the Delver deck. We actually just saw him win his match with.
Yeah, I mean, Paul has played, got in quite a number of games in against Rich after a big shortage in the entire Southwest not being able to log into Magic Online. Last time we tried to play it, um, interestingly enough, he comes back and actually loses game one, where he went from being well above 90% to win. The last time they played, Rich got the penalty of having to be on the draw, start at 6 cards, wins that game, but Paul comes back and wins the next two. So pretty great for Paul. If he wins this match, he's in contention for the 1 seed. If Shuhei loses, if he loses this match, he could be in a tiebreaker scrum. Either way, he's locked up, playing more Magic, which is tends to be the goal.
Yeah, and as it turns out, if Paul wins his match and you win your match, then I'm locked out of the tiebreak scrum for top four. Assuming I
What
also
I'm
win
saying
my
is there's
match.
no chance that both Paul and I will win.
Well, at the beginning of the night, it was four matches had to go against me, and two have already done that. So
All right.
we'll see how this one goes in a few minutes here. Let's take a look at Paul's deck list, since I think that's the one that's going to determine a lot more of kind of where this is headed, because you can build Delver decks in a lot of different ways, and you see Paul has a very anti-workshop Delver list. He's got Trigon Predator in the main deck. He's got the card Delver of Secrets, which is great against workshops in general, and Ingot Chewers. He's got a basic Mountain in the main deck. Like Paul came prepared to play against, well, David specifically.
Yeah, I talked to Paul before he played his first match in the first trimester and asked him how he felt about the shops matchup, assuming that that's what Webb's going to show up with, since it's not too big of a long shot to assume that. And Paul's just like, let's just say I really like my shops matchup. That's kind of what I was gunning for. And yeah, as you said, he's got kind of all the pieces that you want from a Delver deck to be good against shops. And Delver's already a pretty good matchup there. I mean, two main deck Ancient Grudge, like, you just don't see stuff like this very often. And of course, the Trigon Predator. Interestingly, he only has 3 Ingot Chewers, which is probably the best card against shops, especially against Thorn of Amethyst. But he's got a lot of hate. He's got the extra lands. A lot of Delver lists are only playing 14, some play 15. He's up to 16 with that basic mountain, as you mentioned already in the name. So he's got to be pretty happy. I mean, this is the matchup he wanted, and now he's got it.
Yeah, the one thing that I think Paul really has to worry about is Thought Knot Seer, because he does not have a convenient answer to Thought Knot Seer, given that it's not an artifact and doesn't get lightning bolted. So if
Yeah,
David
but
can
it also
string
does have
together multiples,
runs into Young Pyromancer pretty hard. So
true.
he's got some good tools, but yeah, Thought Knots here is out of Lightning Bolt range. That's a reason why a lot of players are starting to shift towards that. Playing white and just having Swords of Plowshare, and of course you've had like Path to Exiles in your deck, at least in your sideboard, and so a lot more ways to deal with those Eldrazi. But those Eldrazi's are also tougher to cast. Mishra's Workshop doesn't help you out there, so we've seen a lot of Eldrazi sitting in people's hands despite them having access to tons of mana.
Yeah, and we'll see whether those Thought Knots come out to play in a second here, since it looks like the players are ready to go. So we'll head down to the match. Alrighty, we've got VSL almost playoffs. This is the last week here, a match between Webb slash Reed Duke. Reed Duke, of course, is playing for David Ochoa this week, playing against Paul Rietzl on the bottom here on Delver. And it looks like Paul's on the play and Reed actually mulliganed.
Yeah, we didn't get to see Reed's initial opening hand, but he's on a one-lander with Wasteland. Do we know if he's fried to the top? Definitely looking for something like a workshop, which tends to be the case when you're playing workshops.
Well, the good news for Reed is that Paul's opening hand, I mean, it's got the preordained, so it can go different places, but this isn't a hand that I would really like be excited about against a workshop deck. No basic land in play, and no early action card. There's no Delver or Pyromancer. The cards you really just want to get on the board.
Right, and Reed slash Webb does have a Wasteland in his hand, but he also has no disruption. There's not a Spear, not a Thorn, no Trinisphere, no Tangle Wire, so nothing to really make it hard for Paul to cast his spells besides the one Wasteland, at least for now.
Well, the good news for Reed is that Phyrexian Revoker does get to name Dak Faden, and because players, of course, have deck lists at this point, there's a good chance that Webb goes after that. Thorn of Amethyst may change things.
Yeah, he gets the turn one Thorn and Wasteland. That is a pretty good draw.
Yeah, Paul's turn 2 is just going to be go unless he draws a Delver of Secrets or a Gitaxian Probe, or potentially like a Mox. And even though Thorn doesn't keep Trigon Predator out, it does give Webb a reprieve from Paul playing any of his cantrips or any other spells.
Yeah, you really doesn't. This hand, as you mentioned, not great against workshops, and especially in the face of a Thorn. This hand, it has some powerful cards in it, Dak and Trigon Predator, but it's just far away from being able to cast them.
So Reed has this option of 2-drops here. You can play Hangerback for 1, Archbound Ravager, or Phyrexian Revoker. What are some of the reasons to go with one of them over the other?
I mean, Hangerback Walker is a nice one to get out just because if you're able to draw any mana source, you can start pumping that, and that combination with Archbound Ravager is extremely powerful. If you don't draw a land, well, it's not really changing much. You're not going to sacrifice anything to the Ravager, realistically. Casting a Revoker now when you don't know what to name, and they can't cast Dak Faden no matter what, because I guess Black Lotus plus land could cast Dak Faden. Unlikely that Paul would choose not to cast Black Lotus if he had it in his hand, just because more sphere effects can actually shut that down. But that's the only real potential thing that Revoker really needs to get down for. So it's between Ravager and Hangerback Walker. You're not going to sacrifice anything to Ravager on the next turn, realistically, and so getting the Hangerback Walker down so you could potentially pump it up should you draw, another Mox. I guess not even another Mox because of Thorn, but just a land that you can't cast anything else with, which I guess he might not have very many of. Eldrazi Temple would have been it before Thought-Knot's here.
And that Thorn continuing to, live up to its name. It's stopping Paul from casting anything. He needs a 3rd land for Trigon. He could cast Spell Pierce, but there aren't very many targets running around, and the Fire Ice is uncastable too, though. I thought that was a turn burn at first. I was like, really? He's going deep, but it's just an alternate version of Fire Ice.
Yeah, the Force of Will is a pretty solid draw, but it's still going to take some time for that to get online. Trigon Predator looks really good on this board, although Hangerback Walker is already starting to grow.
And I think that Mox Sapphire is a chance it prompts Phyrexian Revoker from Reed, but now we're going to see that Force of Will come into play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's not a lot that Reed can do about the Trigon Predator, although even a Tangle Wire will shut it down for a turn, it looks like, unless Paul's able to find a mana source.
Yeah, Ravager does kind of stop Trigon because Webb's going to be able to play the Ravager and then sack the Hangerback, like you said, make some tokens.
He can cast Gush on his turn and spend the mana because he has enough lands to actually just replay one and cast the Trigon Predator, so that is an option available to him. The Thorn definitely does make things a lot trickier. Going down on land, he's going to miss his land drop, so this is not hurting him dramatically, but he will have one less land in play, so the spells he can cast next turn are definitely going to be limited. Of course, if the Trigon just is able to connect and take out that Thorn, well, that opens up a whole world of possibility. He did find Black Lotus.
Yeah, Paul's got some options here. He can play the Trigon, which is undoubtedly his original plan. He can pay 1 mana to get the Lotus out to basically add 2 mana, but there's not actually that much that's exciting that he can use for that. Right. Wouldn't be surprised if you just Trigon.
And something else.
Yeah.
So.
The question is whether it's worth essentially burning Lotus to cast an Ancestral Recall or potentially like a Lightning Bolt.
He has the option of just using that Lotus to get Dak down and stealing a Hangerback Walker, which could be extremely tough for Reed to deal with.
True.
I mean, that option's still going to be available next turn. That Trigon's such a good threat. Now, Reed might just go with Ravager to have some blockers here. He still can't find a mana source, so definitely slows down his development. Tanglewire would have been not the greatest, but at least guarantee that Trigon's not hitting him for a turn.
Especially if it was like Workshop or Ancient Tomb in a Tanglewire, which would then free up, Web/Reed to cast multiple spells on the following turn.
Yeah, that would be obviously a great draw. Workshop, it's just such a critical piece. I mean, you need to play around your own thorns, and that's pretty easy to do when your lands are tapping for 2 and 3 mana, and you're disrupting your opponent's mana with cards like Wastelands. But you don't find a single land, like, doesn't really help you that much.
In this case, too, even just any 1-mana land would have let Reed play his multiple 2-drops plus activate Hangerback every turn. So Reed ended up in a spot where he just even having a regular 3rd land would have been pretty good for him.
Yeah, just getting that Ravager down earlier while still being able to pump Hangerback Walker would have been just a pretty nice bonus to have.
Yeah, Paul's got a lot of options.
So this Fire and Ice is pretty solid against a bunch of tokens potentially, except the Ravager you can just sack to itself and pump up a token.
If Paul has red mana up, Reed may be hesitant to do that. Just run into Lightning Bolt or Fire Ice or something along those lines.
Yeah, I'm not sure what his best path of just starting this turn actually is. Like, just leaving up Lightning Bolt Fire Ice doesn't really do that much. If he attacks with Trigon, Reed will sack the Hangerback Walker. You can respond by trying to bolt the Ravager, but that's not incredible. I mean, it does kill the Ravager. There's not going to be anything to modular onto, but those 3 tokens can gang block the Trigon at that point. He could lead on Lotus and then play Volcanic and then have both Fire and Ice and Bolt up, in which case his Trigon will not be taken down. I think that's probably the best way to go about this.
There's also some value in just getting Lotus out and not using it because you had to pay the 1 at some point anyway.
Right. I mean, just putting it down to start the turn, so at least you have that option of casting 2 red spells. He's not going to go that route. I don't think this works out extremely well unless I miss something.
Though I believe Reed's play is pretty close to forced. If he lets Trigon hit him, then Paul gets just destroy anything. So you might there's not a ton of risk in going for the Hangerback play.
Well, Paul's actually already at 10, which I didn't realize he had taken so much damage. So if these tokens are not dealt with in some way, they're definitely somewhat threatening. I mean, Paul's hand is pretty stacked. There's another Ravager, though, sitting on the other side, so that threatens to kind of fireball someone out.
Yeah, especially with the Thorn out, Paul's really restricted in what he can do, and there's not much he can go for, so looks like he's going to try to keep this Ravager at a low size here.
Yeah, I think by just not casting this Lotus, he's given up a ton of equity.
Because now Web/Reed gets an opportunity to trade 2 Hangerback Walker tokens for the Trigon Predator, so 2 Thopters for a Trigon.
And there's
not a bad deal.
There's just a Tropical up, there's a Thorn out, he knows the list. Yeah, I think this is just a misstep.
Would you call it a mental misstep?
No. I think it was a dexterity issue. He was not able to click on the Black Lotus in time. Physical misstep.
Yeah. So Reed actually has an interesting play here. He can just feed the 3 other artifacts to the Ravager. Ends up with a 4/4 Ravager, 3 Hangerback tokens. That's not lethal, though, so you've got to be feeling a little uncomfortable about what a Paul ends up... Or it ends up with a 5/5 Ravager and 3 Hangerback tokens, and then can block one of the tokens, sack it to the Ravager. He ends up 7 power. He's not quite lethal, but he ends up with a gigantic Ravager.
Yeah, it's it's interesting. I mean, Paul's hand just happens to have Lotus Ancestral Dak dig through time, so getting rid of all the permanents means that there is actually a pretty reasonable chance that Reed will lose. But under most circumstances, that's a pretty good line.
And that's what's got to be what Reed's thinking about here.
Hmm.
One of the fun parts about playing with the Ravager is deciding when you want to just go all in. I tend to like Reed's decision in this particular case, but it's definitely a close one.
Well, the thing is, he has Ravager in his hand, so sacrificing everything right now, it just doesn't do a whole lot for you. Like, yeah, you'll get in one extra hit for four, but at a huge amount of risk that you could potentially do next turn as well.
Right? Especially since casting a Ravager from your hand is already two modular counters by itself, so you're not losing out on that much.
Hmm.
Reed still would really love a workshop or pretty much any other land this turn. Ancient Tomb not bad because now Reed can cast he can cast a Thought Knot Seer if you would like. He can cast Revoker plus Ravager. He's got a lot of options. He can cast either of the 3 mana artifacts, but given the all the lands in play, actually casting Tangler also a pretty valid play here. There's a lot Reed could do.
Yeah, they're all great. I mean, if Paul had a Trigon Predator still in play and all these Thoughtfuls were gone, I'd like his spot a lot more. Right now, it looks pretty tough.
Yeah.
So Revoker's going to just shut down Black Lotus, and Ravager's going to basically threaten to win the game next turn, potentially. I guess unlikely for next turn, but certainly a possibility.
It gets pretty close, especially since
Yeah, but I mean, Paul's going to have enough mana up that it's unlikely that he's going to go for it and not put anything to play, but definitely
well, Paul's not gonna have a ton of mana thanks to the Revoker plus the Thorn. Paul can play one relevant spell this turn.
possible.
He can play like Dig plus Ancestral, but that doesn't add to the board. And at that point, because of the Thorn in play, Reed could potentially go for the win. He can attack for 4, 7, plus maybe some artifacts off the top. So it is getting pretty close.
So Paul can lead on land Dak Fade and try to steal Revoker, which Reed will sacrifice, but that will also free up the Black Lotus immediately to potentially cast something like Fire. The problem is the Dak Fade is just still going to go down.
So, well, this actually does wipe out.
Oh yeah, this will take out all the creatures potentially.
Well, maybe
So,
Reed has the option of sacking the Thopter to Ravager, then sacking the Ravager to itself and making a 4/3 Revoker.
yeah, and keeping Black Lotus down.
That that'd be a pretty heads up play, and I think one that Reed should certainly consider.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's definitely his best line with perfect information. It's
Do
kind
you
of
think?
tough because like you have to weigh all the options of what Paul can actually have here, and they do have deck lists, so he knows that like multiple ancient grudges are in there. There's a Dak Faden in there. What do you need to play around exactly?
I think
Now we also know.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just from Reed's perspective, if you free up Lotus, then Paul gets to cast the Grudge or Dak, and you end up in basically the same spot, just a turn earlier. Because I don't think Reed's going to be able to kill Paul this next turn, but he does end up dealing more damage by keeping the Revoker alive.
One of the big issues is that Paul is also playing a bunch of lightning bolts. So creating a 4/3 with your opponent at 9 is not necessarily the most exciting place to put yourself in.
There's got to be some consideration too for just eating another artifact and making it a 5/4.
Yeah, I agree.
The good thing about this particular turn is Paul's already got the Black Lotus in play, not doing anything. There's a Thorn in play. The best Paul could do is just pass the turn or play a Mox.
Yeah, that turn played out basically perfectly. That's exactly what Reed wanted to do with perfect information, and he's in a good spot. Like everything in his hand kind of lines up with exactly what he wants to be doing as well. Just to just shut down Paul for a turn and make sure this Revoker can get the job done.
Are we under the impression that Reed doesn't always have perfect information?
Yes, that's the impression you're under.
Do you think that the Fire Ice version that Paul chose to use should cost more mana due to the art?
Yes, but I feel like 3 is still fair with or without a thorn.
That's true. Maybe just half a mana somehow.
Should have to just pay a point of life. Half of
So
16 mana.
Reed is in an interesting spot here. He's getting to Thought Knot Seer Paul. He's going to take any of these three cards. None of these cards actually do anything. Dak is the one that affects the board the most. With a Thorn in play, letting Paul cast Ancestral and Dig Through Time is not really the end of the world.
Uh, yes, that's true. If he Ancestrals into Ancient Grudge and has to sack a land, the Thought Knot Seer represents lethal. But that's also true of all the cards. I mean, Dak Faden. Dak Faden's
Dak,
a real
Dak's
threat.
not bad. It does leave the Revoker in play, though, so it doesn't free up the Lotus, unfortunately, for Paul.
He would have to find a land also that he doesn't have to pay life for, so he'd still have to hit before he could cast it, or else he'll just be at 4 and the Thought Knot will kill him. It's probably why Reed is considering taking the Dig Through Time. So if the Ancestral is not threatening and the Dak requires basically a perfect draw of very few outs, where does that leave us?
Also, Dig Through Time and Ancestral cost functionally the same right now because Ancestral costs 2 thanks to Thorn, and Dig, you can exile enough cards to delve to only pay 2, so taking Dig is just basically strictly better than taking Ancestral in this kind of situation. Well, that was a pretty good draw. Paul can play Pyromancer, doesn't get taxed by Thorn, and then play Ancestral Recall to make a token to be able to block. I guess he just has to chump then though. That's actually it just buys him a turn, but I think it's worse than like Lightning Bolt or something like that, but better than a brick.
Yeah, unfortunately, Trinisphere or Tanglewire or Sphere, any of them are all going to make sure the game ends next turn. They all shut down enough mana that Paul just can't do anything. I guess that's not. Is that 100% true? It could be fine off this Ancestral.
He can double chump and then next turn have like Pyromancer plus Bolt or something along those lines.
He could also Ancestral into Gush, in which case.
That would be great. Or Delver. Delver would actually give him another way to chump and keep his Pyromancer alive.
Mm-hmm. Or double block and kill their Invoker. Or. Guess he can't really kill Thought. He found Delver. Fortunately, he doesn't actually have any spell to trigger the Pyromancer.
Currently, no.
This is actually an interesting spot on the box.
It's pretty tough for Reed as well because if he attacks with both creatures, one of the natural blocks Paul might line up is Pyromancer plus token on the Revoker, and then Delver chumps Thought Knot, letting Paul untap with 8 mana.
Right. Yeah, that's how I would block. I think that gives you the best chance to win. I mean, having another Pyromancer in hand and a Dak, of course. The Dak Reed does know about.
Well, Reed does also minimize what Dak does here. He doesn't have a big artifact to steal anymore, so by trading off the Revoker, Dak just turns into a card that draws Paul more cards, but kind of as we pointed out before the match, there's just not a lot of cards in Paul's deck that handle Thought Knot one on one. Of course, Pyromancer can make some tokens to block it, and that's really going to ultimately be what Paul needs to do here.
If he's also may get multiple turns, I guess Reed's going to get to cast something good to help shut that down, but if he didn't have a Tanglewire, then Paul would have multiple turns of getting to use Dak to potentially find Pyromancer plus Spell the Chain. Now it's pretty tough. Tanglewire is a good one.
So Paul needs to draw a spell that costs 2 or less mana in order to trigger this Pyromancer and buy himself to more time. But then Reed starts to up the mana denial, though I guess he's in the same spot as before where he can chump but uses Delver Secrets to chump. Getting to play another sphere of either kind does make Paul's life harder to, because Paul's going to try to dig into more spells to trigger this Pyromancer, and it's going to be hard for him to find him. I guess he can play Dak plus Delver here.
The fortunate thing is Pyromancer is one of the cards he most wants to have in his hand in a turn. He could steal.
Stealing a Mox does not sound unreasonable to me.
Yeah, gives him something else to tap.
It does make Reed's mana situation a little worse, especially with that Tanglewire in play, but not appreciably so. Reed would love to draw another Thought-Knots here.
Can you tap deck into Tanglewire like you can with Tamiyo?
I do not believe so. I tapped a Liliana in the Pro Tour last week. It was not very effective.
Yeah, Owen tapped one with an Elder Deep Fiend. If Reed had one less permanent, maybe it had to be two less permanents, would have had to consider stealing Tanglewire with Dak Faden just to keep it at 4 and to tap Reed down a little bit more. But with the amount of permanents he had, it's just better to have the extra mana source and to let Tanglewire tick down, because honestly, Paul needs his mana more because he has to get back into this game. Like, maybe Reed will find better use of the mana, but that doesn't really matter once you're this far behind.
So having a Sphere of Resistance in play, since Sphere of Resistance stacks well with Thorn of Amethyst, whereas Trinisphere and Thorn don't really interact, will give Paul not a whole lot of options here when it comes to what he can cast. He's going to have pay 3 for the Pyromancer, and then have 1 mana up to be able to play something and trigger the Pyromancer with a Thorn and a Sphere in play.
I mean, if he had Swords to Plowshares in his deck, this game would be very much live, but tough.
That's the reason I played white in all my Delver decks recently, just because Swords to Plowshares is so good.
Yeah. Time Walk there would have been a little interesting. Just get to dig a little bit deeper. It's tough to deal with this many sphere effects. Like, your 15 land decks are just not equipped for that.
Even a Delver deck that's heavily biased against workshops, fundamentally the Delver deck is not set up to play well against workshops. I mean, you can make your matchup better. Paul did make his matchup better by the cards he chose, but it's still just going to be tough because the workshop deck just preys on Delver's low land count and necessity of all those cantrips very, very well.
I mean, it really was Thought-Knots here this game. Like, even if those were Lodestone Golems, like, Paul would be looking good.
Yeah, Thought-Knots here, dodging Dak Faden and Lightning Bolt and all those other cards is huge.
Perfect draw.
Attacks improve. Less of a good deal when it costs 3 mana.
And you don't have 2 life.
So now Paul can cast a 4 mana Preordain and have 1 mana untapped and no card that will get him out of this.
Yep. Well, you're 1 game closer to having equity.
Well, my deck is not very well equipped to play against Orchard Mox Oath with Force of Will backup, unfortunately. So
as we throughout this Super League, no one really has that.
And that's why Shuhei is 1,000,000-0.
Yeah, only has 2 losses, and one of them, outside of the times where people actually right-click concede and then pressed OK, he had a smaller chance of losing the game against Rietzl than any of the other ones.
So, taking a look at sideboards here, Paul gets to bring in Ingot Chewer, Sudden Shock if you to fight against maybe Ravager, Soulful Elemental if he wants another creature. Those aren't super exciting. Still no great answer to Thought-Knots here. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I had a rug deck that had a Flame Slash in the sideboard at one point. Because that can kill Thought-Knots here.
I mean, that game really just hinged on the one turn. I think if he led on Lotus and fired the tokens, Trigon Predator would have started taking out mana sources. The Thought-Knot Seer just never comes down, and I think Paul wins that game.
Yeah, I agree. So David Ochoa, on the other hand, taking a look at what he's got to sideboard here, he does not get to do a whole lot. He gets to bring in Dismember if he wants to kill the creatures, but not a whole lot past that. Maybe Ratchet Bomb, again, the workshop decks are pretty much set up to play against these Delver decks already.
Not sure what Paul was thinking about. So Paul gets to be on the play again. Usually we'd be talking about the extra lands boarded in, but Paul main decked them.
Yes, he did.
Another one of those decent but not exciting hands.
Ingature to Trigon with what I can only assume is a Fire Ice and a real Magic card is pretty good, especially since Reed's hand does not have any mana disruption.
It's kind of unfortunate just because he wants to get the basic island that you want to lead on, and neither of the fetch lands he had can get the basic mountain, and he needs to have green mana as well, plus get up to 3 lands, so not necessarily a cakewalk, but he's able to find a volcanic and can start to set up his hand.
Do you think that Paul should have a Taiga in his deck for situations like this?
It seems pretty convincingly obvious that he should, yes. Got to make sure your Trigon Predators are optimized. So it looks like Reed drew a proxy for Mishra's workshop.
But Reed can now play. He already actually could play Ravager plus Hangerback or double Ravager turn one. Now he doesn't take damage to do so. Not actually the best Mishra's Workshop I've ever seen. Reed would have not minded something like a Thought-Knot Seer instead.
Yeah, turn one Thought-Knot's pretty good.
Interesting. Reed not interested in playing Hangerback, presumably because he wants to play a Hangerback for 3 on turn 2.
Yeah, it's a pretty good place to be. But Paul can just fire, kill both of these Ravagers, and there's nothing that Reed can do about it. In theory. If he's F6'd.
Yes. Arcbound Ravager, I mean, historically that card's been very resilient to 1-for-1 removal. So, the fact that Paul has a bunch of removal spells in his hand, it's not that bad for Reed.
Ooh, those are good removal spells, though.
Yes, Ancient Grudge does fight very effectively against Ravager.
And Force of Will for a Hangerback on 3 that he wouldn't have had great answers to is also really nice. I think we found a use for the burn turn. That's not good.
Unfortunate for Paul, he can't actually fetch and shuffle and have red mana without cutting off green mana, but I think he's just happy redrawing whatever he put back on top and just starting to fire off Ingot Chewers here.
Yeah, I'm pretty surprised he got rid of Force of Will blue card there. Just because it doesn't really give you a whole lot. Like, you can put the lands on top. If you get wasted, you can just draw running lands. If you don't, you can put the Misty on top and then go get the land that you need. I don't really understand what the appeal is.
Hangerback Walker is a really important piece of this puzzle. It does so much work against the removal decks too. Just the fact that it turns into a bunch of distinct little flyers, it's very powerful. And Paul, even though he's got Ancient Grudge, Revoker, Trigon Predator, I don't think it's a gimme here, especially since, as you noted, he did put back the Forcible.
Yeah.
And so Reed choosing to play Hangerback for 2 instead of 3, so he can play the Revoker and presumably name Dak Vaden.
Oh no. This is a massive misplay, right? If he plays his land first, he can respond to the modular going on the hanger back by at least. Oh no, he can't do anything.
Yeah, Paul has all sorcery speed
Yeah.
effects.
Ancient Growth
So
in the graveyard.
Reed has enough mana from his land, so now we're going to see just a gigantic hangerback. I
Oh,
wouldn't be surprised if Reed chose to split up the hangerback now just to play around Dak Vaden.
yeah, he had the Ingot Chewer. He had to play the Volcanic and Ingot Chewer. Or,
Yeah, Volcanic Ingot Chewer targeting hangerback Walker or targeting Ravager, I guess.
he's not going to have any outs to the hanger back now.
Hangerback Walker are doing some work here.
I mean, I assume he doesn't have a Slice Dice type card. Yes.
Well, because the hangerback's in one piece, as it were, if Reed loses the Revoker and then Paul untaps and draws Dak Vaden, that could be problematic.
Yeah, except he just killed it and made 1,000,000 tokens.
Well, let's see Ancient Grudges start doing some work. I guess Trigon does block and eat one of the creatures, so Paul can play Trigon. He can Ingot Chewer down the Revoker, block a token, takes 6, or just takes 7, I guess.
Well, he got the Trigon down before his green mana got wasted, so that's a
It does help.
plus. So why didn't he use the Ingot Chewer?
Maybe he wants to hardcast Ingot Chewer next turn. I don't know if he has enough time for that. He might have to cast Fire Ice plus Ancient Grudge next turn.
Hardcasting Ingot Chewer is just not exciting, especially when you have a Trigon Predator in play. Although the Predator, if Reed wants, is just never getting through if it was 7 Thought the tokens, but I assume Reed's going to be attacking, especially without like a big anything to protect. Trigon's doing the exact same on offense as defense right now, just picking off a token one at a time. And I think Paul was really set up in both of these games to do some work.
I like having outs for the top 4 at least.
Yeah.
Attacking with Trigon is strictly better than blocking. You still get to kill something, at least do 2 damage to Reed here. Fire Ice plus Ancient Grudge or Fire Ice plus Ingot Chewer means that Paul isn't dead this turn, and he's actually kind of close to stabilizing.
Yeah, I mean, he could have saved a point of damage by using that Ingot Chewer. And, of course, the whole prior turn could have been pretty different. But I really don't understand not using the Ingot Chewer when you have Trigon Predator, Fire Ice, Ancient Grudges. Predator in play and 2 artifact removal spells. It seems like you'd really like to be mana efficient and take every life point you can because it's going to be razor thin.
So Paul's going to go to 2 here, going to be facing down 3 tokens. Attack a Trigon, now there's 2 tokens. Ingot Chewer token, go to 1.
Yeah,
Maybe flashback a token.
That cost him 2 points of life that he could have just gotten that Revoker earlier.
Reed really needed to draw pretty much any creature these last couple turns.
He's also going to have a ton of turns to just draw like Triskelion and just win the game.
Yeah.
However, he's also going to have a ton of dead draws in his deck. Like,
With an active Trigon out, yeah. There's not a lot that does anything.
Tangle Wires and Spheres and the like look pretty bad.
Well, as you said, the Ingot Chewer eventually did get the Thopter, so it's the same situation as before, except Paul would have been outside of a Triskelion range.
Mm-hmm.
Despite Thought-Knot's here missing on an actual card, it's not a bad draw here. It's a 4/4. It can attack past Paul's current set of creatures if the Delver doesn't flip. This is always the big turn where, yeah, you want to flip into a
True.
preordain or a gush or something, and it's just so different than if you just reveal a land and have a crappy 1/1.
All right.
Pyramids are not bad. Paul offering the trade of one of his flyers for the Thought Knot Seer currently.
Yeah, and he'll get a card out of that. There's a brick for Reed. I'm not even sure he can trade the Thought Knots. Like, the Thought Knots here is actually can't block the flyers, but it is playing defense. Giving your opponent a card when they have Young Pyromancer is a tough spot. Of course, not attacking and letting them have these flyers if he does draw a spell for Young Pyro just means he's drawing solely to Triskelion because that Thought Knot will never get through. Preordain's insane.
Yep, preordain does the trick. So Reed basically has like at this point only around 2 draws to hit Triskelion. Otherwise, then he will die to the flyers. The real question is, can Paul find Force of Will and a blue card before Reed finds a Triskelion?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that'll help him. Now he just needs Force of Will. Okay. I think I want to hold on to the deck there as a blue card.
Ancestor Recall's a blue card.
Yes. Yeah, I think he definitely needs like that strip mine's pretty bad. He wanted to hold on to the deck for sure.
It would appear so, yeah. All right, so not only does Reed only have 1 draw to hit Triskelion, Paul's going to see at least 6 cards this turn and potentially more.
Right. I mean, if he can find a gush here, he just wins. He gets to make the final token. And he didn't do it. No, he found Bolt. So yeah, if he casts Gush on the end step, then then it's just lethal on board.
Bolt does the trick as well.
Yes, finding the Bolt will also work. Maybe he'll Bolt the Thought Knot Seer to get that extra card.
If he did that, he might draw a Lightning Bolt.
Or Gush.
All right, so Workshops gets to be on the play this game, which is, as we've all seen many, many times, pretty good. Whether Reed can get a Sphere or a Thorn out before Paul starts cycling through his cards is going to be interesting. Note that Reed didn't play a single mana denial card that game. He only played creatures, which actually lined up pretty well against Paul's infinite removal spells. It was impressive, but is going to need something a little bit better next game.
Yeah, I mean, fighting through 7 Thopters is not something you see very often in any format, but
Paul fought through 7 Thopters like the hard way, like killing them all one by one, maybe
yeah.
two by one with a Fire Ice, and just it was pretty impressive.
Paul's just got the same 60 cards sitting on the screen.
Paul, the way his deck is constructed, the cards in his sideboard are like mental missteps that he has 0% chance of wanting. There's not a whole lot of like flexibility in this particular matchup. It's just the way the cards line up.
Yeah, I mean, I consider playing Spell Pierce on the play, which he didn't have last game, just as a 1 mana way to stop a Sphere of Thorn that you don't want to forcible. But
Yeah.
it gets real bad real quick. Oh, this is an interesting hand.
It is. I think this hand is awesome though. This is a turn one Trinisphere from Reed. It's going to get Force of Will, but still, a turn one Trinisphere on the play, especially with a potentially a Chalice, is good. The Chalice against these Delver decks, I tend to like to cast at one a lot more than zero.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this hand by Paul is actually just great. This is his first hand that actually has a Force of Will. His first hand that actually has a Delver.
Yeah, Paul's well set up. This is all the cards he needs.
Yeah.
I loved Reed's play of no Chalice there, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Chalice, of course, gets so much worse after board where, they're actually bringing in Ancient Grudge, although Paul had the man and a bunch of Ingot Chewers. There's just a lot of ways to actually deal with the Chalice, but still a great card.
That's a good draw. Ancient Tomb will allow Reed to cast Thought Knot Seer. He also, while leaving up Dismember, and Thought Knot could give him more information on what he wants to Chalice for. Alternately, he could Chalice for two. Chalice for two stops Ancient Grudge and Young Pyromancer, which is very appealing.
It also stops Phyrexian Revoker, Arcbound Ravager, and a lot of other cards in Reed's deck. All the spheres, all the
True.
thorns. Lots of twos.
Given the Dismember, Reed doesn't have to take the Pyromancer, but the Lightning Bolt's not going to kill the Thought Knot Seer either. So he's got a DAC as well. There's a lot of valid choices here for a Thought Knot Seer.
Yeah, the problem is if you leave the Pyromancer to dismember it, that Delver is just going to start clocking you. Like, Ancient Tomb represents about half your mana, and if this Delver flips, it's going to potentially be a 4-turn clock. That's not a great spot to be in, and even less with the Lightning Bolt in hand that you definitely can't take. If Delver doesn't flip, though, it's pretty embarrassing. Probably should still attack. No, I guess you better to block, but
Leaving it back forces the Dismember now because of that Lightning Bolt. Reed could also just not play the Dismember and just play Chalice for one. That could prompt a Bolt one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. Oh, he's gonna have to bolt. I guess leaving your hand is not awful with Deck Fading though, but
And with Ancient Grudge in your deck, they could potentially unlock it later.
yeah.
Thought Knot Seer once again dodging Deck Fading very nicely.
You can actually cast Dismember for 2 less life now too. That Mox Jet.
Do you think that's why the Mox Jet's in the workshop deck?
I believe it is the reason. I would have to ask Webb though. The workshop connoisseur.
Do you think I assume Webb knows who wins this match already since he's in Australia and it's already Wednesday for him? So,
Yeah,
but
don't
it's
spoil
good of
it.
him not to spoil it. Wow, Paul went to the face with that lightning bolt. Aggressive.
Play one way.
So a good reason for Reed to dismember to Delver now is it doesn't give Paul the information about his top card with a Scalding Tarn in play, which is pretty relevant. Jack Faden once again wishing he was if he was the greatest thief, he'd be able to steal a Thought Knot Seer, right? Like he can't. He has to call him like one of the greater thieves, right? Not necessarily the greatest thief.
Yeah, as opposed to all those other thieves that have been taking Thought Knot Seers left and right. Doesn't seem that easy to steal an Eldrazi.
They are pretty. You have to have like a pretty large bag. This is one of the few times I've ever seen this. Dak Faden could be cast and just is not cast when you have not much else to do that's relevant.
Why would you not cast it?
He just doesn't want to get it eaten by the Thought Knot Seer. Instead, I believe his plan is to go
Gain 4 life, steal a Mox is still better than most things you can do.
Ancient Grudge, end of turn. At this point, you might want to just hit the sphere since it's presented itself as a target.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're forced to grudge the Chalice before you play the Delver. Well, This is going to be a close game. These are the draw steps Reed needs to hit another creature on. He's not hit a threat in a few turns, and he's probably gonna need one more threat to close out this game. I find it unlikely that Thought Not Seer by itself will do the trick.
You can get in there for 3.
Well, both players are well aware that Paul can block and sudden shock. It's not that bad for Reed because it forces Paul to leave the mana up, and that's an interesting one. Arcbound Ravager, which is also vulnerable to sudden shock.
Yeah, and to deck fade him. But Paul's just so, like, having to keep your mana untapped is so brutal.
So, given that you have a Ravager, you know about Dark Fate, you have perfect information here for if you're Reed. If you trade here, you'll give Paul a card, but you'll end up having a Ravager in play that's basically just going to get died to Dark Fate, and that doesn't seem particularly fruitful.
Yeah, that seems bad. I think you just have to play Ravager and pass. I guess you don't have to play Ravager, but actually, what he can do, that's not bad either. He might just want to play Ravager and then sack an artifact and see what happens. Like, Paul can't realistically use Sudden Shock on Ravager pre-combat. The Thought Knot just comes in. So you could just grow Ravager to a 3/3. He plays Dak and tries to steal it, then you're forcing him. I guess he doesn't even have to chump with the Delver, though, so it's tough. He's at 5, not 4. Yeah, all these lines are super close.
I like not letting Paul use his mana on Sudden Shock to kill Thought Knot Seer this turn,
Yeah.
forcing him to, if he wants to do, like you said, tap out for Dak, and then you get an attack with Thought Knot.
Yeah, he just doesn't have a lot of answers to the Thought Knot. They all require multiple cards.
And Reed is getting value here by just passing with Thought Knot in play. Like Paul is leaving mana for Sudden Shock that is just not doing anything, not progressing the game at all.
I think I like sacking a Mox here and seeing what happens. Admittedly, it's close and neither play is extremely exciting, but
All right, so Paul has committed to not having an answer to Thought Knot yet by Sudden Shocking the Arcbound Ravager. He really just needs to find Young Pyromancer. That's the card that's going to get him out of this.
Webb is playing Triskelion, right? We haven't seen one in the match.
He only has 4 of them, so it's surprising he hasn't drawn any. Well, there's the Pyromancer. Hangerback Walker, significantly less exciting when you know your opponent has a Dark Fate in their hand.
Yes.
At this point, Thought Knot Seer is likely to march in just because offering the trade for a Pyromancer is good with the Delver blocking, or you knock Paul to 1 and you're happy either way. Not too happy given what you drew, but it's better than sitting it back.
Yeah, this seems pretty close to your best case scenario, and at the same time, it's not a great case. Your Hangerback Walker just doesn't do much unless it activate him.
Well, Paul's going to start seeing many more cards than Reed here. Arcbound Ravager, a pretty solid draw here too, because it can just convert Hangerback into a bunch of individual tokens.
Yeah, this is one of those odd spots, I feel like, where both your cards in hand are good. You don't really want to discard either of them, but you still need to plus Dak, because if you minus it and steal something relevant, you can't steal something the following turn.
Paul wouldn't mind a Mox here, but he is able to cast the spells he needs to cast. Sphere Resistance does complicate that slightly much. So it's getting to the point where Strip Mine plus the Mox can stop Reed from casting future Thought Knot Seers or
Yeah.
Triskelions.
I guess Regis F6. Kind of forgot about the deck Faden. Giving your opponent untapped Mox when you have a Spear out is definitely not optimal. Now, if he casts the Revoker, Paul can Lightning Bolt at end phase when he couldn't have done that otherwise.
This is going to work out not well for Reed, but because he thinks that. I mean, I think he's kind of forced into it. He's losing right now. Revoker on Dak will protect his Hangerback Walker, but the sequence of Lightning Bolt into Steel Hangerback is. I guess it gets rid of Dak Faden. That is the upside, but it is still not great for Reed.
Yeah. Seeing a bunch of cards here is going to be pretty good. Paul's got a whole lot of Ingot Chores and Ancient Grudges and such in his deck. There's the Force of Will. Is I guess Reed's at a point where he can't even cast Triskelion now
You cannot.
after losing 4 mana on the previous turn.
Those Ancient Tombs also do add up. Arcbound Ravager. A bit late on this one. It's Paul could even just counter it if he's that worried.
He'd really prefer not to, since you can die to Triskelion, but there's an option. At the very least, he should have responded with Dig Through Time. At that
The Sphere
point,
of Resistance in play.
Force.
He could have I guess tapped less mana.
Yeah, he could have just left the Mox on top. Delve for one more.
Ooh, Time Walk plus Trigon Predator, the combo.
You can't cast them both, though.
He's one short.
That would be the combo, though.
It's still a combo the next turn.
Well, I mean, he's in a position where this game is just over with the Force of Will in hand. Reed can't even cast more spells because of the Ancient Tombs.
Paul's almost going to be able to deal lethal with Trigon Predator and Time Walk, even without like caring about blowing up artifacts.
It's true. Is it destroy any artifact or an artifact an opponent controls? Otherwise, he can bring Hangerback to a 3/3 and just kill him.
I believe it's one they control.
Card's bad.
You kind of forced to attack with Ravager here, which just kind of runs into the Hangerback, which will make itself a 2/2.
Yeah, and that's lethal with Time Walk, even with no abilities. So Paul wins both of his matches. He gets to 6-3. Rich Shay's at 6-3. Shuhei 6-2.
She has 6-3 at the very worst.
Yeah. What?
Paul going for the maximum score here.
Well, if Reed sticks to his, what he always does and never concedes, time walking here and Trigon killing the Mox so your opponent only has 2 Ancient Tombs at 1 life is probably the best thing to do. Didn't let it happen.
So when I play Reed and I cast Dramoka's command for lethal, he makes me pick my other mode. Yet here he'll just concede to a time walk. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I've been in that same spot. I saw your feature match. Just like I have Dramoka's command, like help my guy. Just like
Yeah.
or like Reed's passing the turn tapped out. I'm like I have the tendrils or whatever. And he's like, all right, let's see if you can cast it.
He was
And
playing
tap,
against
tap, cast it. He's like,
Yukihiro for top 8, and he's like, burn spell to kill you, and he's like, tap your mana. It's like, okay. So
yeah,
Paul takes down Webb/Reed to advance to 6-3, and I guess my fate is no longer in my hands. I'm up next. I'm playing against Shuhai, and if I win and you win, then we have our final four without me. If I win and you lose, then I guess we're tied for top four. We get a playoff in.
yeah. I mean, to be fair, the fate was never really in your hands. It's just whether Shuhei draws like Shuhei draws or doesn't. And yeah, he's been drawing like Shuhei draws pretty often.
So we'll see how this goes. We'll be back in a few minutes with our next round of Vintage Super League.